I think we did it.
Okay.
I'm on. We're on.
Cool.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi. So,
Hi.
what's going on?
Oh, nothing. Just tired from a long drive this morning. So yeah.
You've been so patient with me. I have to say I don't like to reschedule, but you've been just such a wonderful gentleman. So I want to share that too, because behind the scenes sometimes we get different people, and I just want to give you a shout out. You were so sweet to me.
Oh, well, I would like to say that comes naturally, but and I guess it kind of does. I mean, I screw up too. So there you go.
There you have it. Okay. So
Yeah.
give us let everybody know kind of a little bit about you. Usually I do the intros, but I just find that the teachers do a better job.
Got it. So I'm a Capricorn. I like
Aw.
long walks. I like long walks in the woods, and um, I consider myself a sensitive individual. I'm
Aw.
vegan. I'm vegan.
Are you vegan?
I am vegan. Yeah.
How
Yeah.
long have you been vegan?
About 4 years now. It's
Yeah.
been it was at first purely health-wise from my cardiologist, but then once you're there, you kind of see things differently. So yeah, that's me.
It's true. It's
But
true.
that's really not what you were asking about,
I
was it?
know, but I'm always, I mean, these are the little things I think, Walt, that makes talks here a little different, because I
Okay.
do think sometimes students are interested in that kind of stuff, because I
Yeah.
think it's not just the classes you teach, it's the person behind the classes. So,
Yeah.
like I said, I want to bet. All right, I'll let you go. I already got
You
it.
know, I consider myself a real contrarian when it comes to a lot of things, especially a lot of things manual therapy. Um, I guess it's based on my own history in the manual therapy community, and I'm going to use the words manual therapy versus massage because it rolls off my tongue a little easier. But we both share space in multiple communities online, in the massage community, the manual therapy, the therapeutic communities, etc. I am very cynical, having been bitten a number of times on the butt. Um, and I think a lot of people are put off by my cynicism because it often seems to really conflict with, kind of the inherited narratives that we're given and we're taught, and we're sort of like, pushed down our throats that we just accept as fact. And, I don't, I'm not a contrarian just to be a pain in the ass, although that's a role that I don't not enjoy. Um, but it's just to really, ask ourselves those questions. Are we really doing what we think we're doing? Are we communicating in a completely transparent and honest way with our clients? And are we giving them the respect that what's that?
I mean, I'll just keep jumping in. That's a good one for life in general that I work on.
Yeah, because I think when I was started out this journey of mine, well after PT school was over, but in myofascial release, I was in the echo chamber of MFR. I was in an echo chamber that, basically it's, oh my gosh, this was early 90s and we were already talking, well, we didn't talk about conspiracy theories, but God, we're basically being embedded in one that nobody knows what we know about fascia, and, everybody else is missing the bigger picture. And, that's really ego gratification at its finest when you come away thinking, man, I've got a skill set that even physicians don't know because they don't study fascia and all that stuff. And, it kind of ruined me for a while. It created a really good therapist out of me, I think. But the realization that maybe it was less about the hands-on work that I did with people than my own evolution of treating patients as equals and not as subjects, and now, I still do what I learned as MFR back in the early 90s, but I just call it manual therapy, because really lack of credibility issues when it comes to proving all the claims that are made. But those credibility issues, I really think, apply across the board in our shared fields if we're really brave enough to look outside the rabbit holes that we tend to exist in.
So could you one of the things I want to point out too is I'll put up your website here in a minute, but you have a lot of great information on there. You have wonderful videos, so people should check that out. So you dive into things a little more. So, and that's one of the things that you said that I really liked, was that you don't so much focus on treating tissues as you do the human being.
Yeah.
Uh, could you just dive into that just a little bit more? I mean, I have my ideas on what you're saying, but
I think all of us have been we've been taught to mischaracterize really what's happening with clinical interactions. You take a class on trigger point work, and the world seems to revolve around those little black dots within people that have never been shown to exist. And I mean, there's a lot of metaphors and analogies in our shared field, but we take them as truisms. Am I treating fascia in isolation? I think it's really hard to do that without incorporating a whole person approach that as soon as I touch somebody, is the moment I touch somebody, I double, triple, quadruple the number of actions for the mechanisms, how changes occur beyond, it could be the fascia, right? They've not proven it yet. People say, well, they've not disproven it. And that's the absence of evidence or the evidence of absence, that sort of thing. But, we might be influencing muscles directly, but we're also creating an instantaneous awareness on the part of the central nervous system of our patient, which is fully capable of eliciting the changes that we think we're getting because we're somehow tissue savants and can isolate that individual pathology. And it's not that we don't do good work. We do effective work. But I think it's just time to really take those blinders off the donkey and see, what, we're treating human beings. We're not treating, an inhibited muscle or a fascial train all by itself in isolation. And I know why I don't get invited to manual therapy like cocktail parties, because, basically it's I think a lot of people are just full of shit when it comes to really telling the full story. And excuse me for my profanities, but it's really tough. And as I got older, my filters have gone off where I don't feel like I need to be so honoring tradition to the point where we allow somebody just to continue to tell these stories without asking them for evidence to prove it. And look at what's happening on social media with evidence right now, not just manual therapy evidence, but in general. I mean, it's there's two parallel worlds, and my God, in manual therapy, there's hundreds, if not thousands, parallel worlds where everybody thinks that they've got ownership of truth.
Okay. So
that's a lot.
I want to break some of that down. I always take notes, because one of the first things where you started off with that I really liked was the whole trigger point metaphor. So one of the things that I think is, so I always say, if you put a point on the wall, if you're demanding someone see your point of view, you might as well just put a little dot on the wall, and you have everyone stare at that point, just that one point, and then they miss everything around it. So say we're focusing on just one point on the body, just one thing, just one spot, then the whole person behind that body. I feel like, what happened to this person before they got to me what have they been doing for the last 50 years? All those things I think sometimes get lost in the shuffle. So when I looked at your website and I heard some of the things you were saying, I felt super connected to that part of your teaching, that you're going above and beyond. You're not afraid to get outside the box a little, Walt. I like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a study that it first seems it's outside the manual therapy and the massage community because it was done by a speech pathologist. But there's a condition called muscle tension dysphonia. As you might know, reading my website, I kind of had sort of, narrowed my focus to working with voice, swallowing, airway, oral motor disorders. But there's a study that was done released in 2019 where they took a look at a woman with muscle tension dysphonia, which is characterized by hoarseness, vocal hoarseness. And it was always viewed as, there's too much muscle tension here. And all the old papers talk about breaking the tension, right? Much like we do when it comes to a lot of the different type of things that we work with. But what they did in this instance was they had the woman in an MRI and they had her read a script, right? And what they were doing was, while she was reading the script, they were watching her brain. activation levels, activity of the brain. And what they noticed was a typical dysregulated brain activity that's characteristic of the specific disorder. They pulled her out of the machine. They basically did the equivalent of a session of their more aggressive laryngeal manipulation. And then they put her back in the machine and they had her read the same script. And what they saw was a brain pattern change that went from completely dysregulated to regulated. Yes, she was able to speak more clearly, but what they saw was basically it was a central nervous system change, and not solely here at the periphery. Now, the study doesn't say, see, everybody's wrong, it's not here, it's here. But what it's showing is it's a complete response from a human being, and not these simplistic fairy tales that you and I and most of us have been taught that, oh, no, it's just their fascia, or if they're just their posture, or these singular, these isolated viewpoints of the reductionism that's so easy to do in our field.
It is. It's convenient. I mean, it's convenient, but
and let's face it, Diane, patients love it. Patients love these niche fairy tales that we tell. And they'll come in telling those niche fairy tales themselves. And it's like, I got to watch myself that I don't completely step on their values and expectations, right? Because somebody gave them that belief that their fascia is restricted. And I don't want to totally stomp on that story, even though I'd like to. But what I do is I try and insert at least one additional plausible narrative to introduce the concept of uncertainty. That, yeah, it could be, because your posture's poor, it could be because blah, blah, blah. But it also could be, and I tend to lean into more neurocentric explanations that a lot of people don't get from Dr. Google, right? Or they don't get from their previous therapist. I like to get introduced to them the option that there's a lot of uncertainty here. And even though I'm an expert, the more I learn, the less of which I'm certain.
Yes. The more, my dad used to always say, the more you know, the less you grow.
Yeah. There's all sorts of variations on that statement, but someone once said it was attributed to Einstein, but I looked it up and that's a bunch of crap. But because it just sounds great to repeating Einstein's lines, right? But really, the greater we cast that web of learning mechanisms of action, the more confusing it is. But to me, instead of being confused, it's just validation that there's so many possibilities of why touch creates impact.
The possibilities in my mind are endless. So
yeah.
So tell us a little bit. I mean, I got to know you because of my dear friend Nate Fay. He was raving about you, and then one of my staff members actually took your class, and he is doing magic here in our area.
Oh, cool.
That class. He's doing a lot of your techniques, and he's focusing on TMG and working with people that might have some swallowing or voice issues. So I have to give you a shout out because he's kind of found a little niche within a niche. So Freedom Massage, he's kind of like our TMG specialist. And TMJ, sorry.
Well, it's TMD. Temporal mandibular disorder, the same thing. So I knew what you were talking about. Yeah. And I don't remember his name, but I do remember the
Andrew. He's great.
Got it. I do remember the interaction really, really fondly. And, to me, my approach is, about the techniques that I teach and use. But, let's face it, most of us adapt, modify, or just downright like mimic things we've learned in classes. And I'm using techniques that I learned in myofascial release and, college, craniosacral, all these different, acronym-based type of intervention models that I've learned. But, I tell people the first day of every one of my classes that they think they're coming to my class for some nifty hands-on learning, which you are. But really, I hope what they leave with is an understanding of how shared decision-making can influence change in a human being by elevating a patient's sense of value and self-worth, that they do have things to contribute in an interaction that they may not necessarily think that they do, right? I love asking questions like, okay, right now, does it feel like we're doing something that might be helpful? Those are hard questions, right? Does it feel like this is of value, what we're doing right now? Or Might you like me to modify it? That's a lot of stinking responsibility to put on people who come into our practice basically ready to give up all power because they hope we're the person with all the answers.
Oh my God, I love that.
And I think that everybody could benefit, everybody in our shared fields, from basically stepping off of that platform of being the healer, the expert, the master, whatever you like to call yourself, right? And realize that I do know a lot, we know a lot, but we don't know what a patient knows. We don't know what they're fearing, they're hoping for, they're expecting, what they've had in the past, all the little triggers, right? And as soon as I open up that dialogue, that if you help me help you, I'll stand a better chance of helping you. That's a big game changer for a lot of people. Not everybody will play my game. Some people want to be treated like I'm the expert and they're willing to do what I think is best. And I'll do it if I have to, but I do it really a little resentfully. I don't like it. And some people end up going to find another clinician in my area where I'm at that will basically say, here's what's wrong with you, here's what we have to do. And you know what? They'll probably be helped by that because from a cognitive behavioral perspective, that's their inherent belief system. And I need to find an expert who will guide me. But I'm looking for the people who are looking to partner with me.
Walk with you, take the journey with you. So
yeah,
what do you think? I mean, this isn't very professional, but I'll say it sometimes.
That's okay.
I'll say it to
Go
my
ahead.
sometimes. They'll be like, what do you think that is, Diane? And I say, I don't know. I'm not in there.
Yeah.
I don't
So
know.
here's how, no, that's really good. I like that.
Not,
you're immediately spreading the vagary, right? Here's what I tend to do. You know, during the intake, I listen to their story because everyone has a story. Everyone's got one, right? And they tend to lean into something, you know, maybe it's previous therapist, maybe it's your doctor, maybe it's Dr. Google, right? All those places that they get this information. I'm a very keen listener. Like, let's just say somebody said, you know what, it's scar tissue. It's a common one we hear, right? And, you know, when they say, well, what do you think? Oh, you found it. What do you think that is? And the first thing I'll do is I'll validate their pre-existing beliefs. Yeah, it certainly could be scar tissue like your doctor told you. It also could be maybe not scar in the traditional sense, but maybe it's a way your nervous system is sort of bound down around that injury and really just hasn't figured out a way to let go yet. You know, and it's not exactly a scientific answer. It sounds useful. It sounds interesting. You know, people give us that sort of blank nod. It's like, oh, okay, right? And I might give them one or two more examples. And I let them know that I used to think it was all about one thing. And everything in MFR is explained by a fascial restriction. Everything. But that's the same thing with trigger point work or, you know, strength work or whatever. We all explain it from that narrow lens, that small aperture of our training. And all I do is try and like expand it just a bit to see, you know what, it might not be what you think it is, but we can still help you with this. As a quick aside here, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, but there was a study done a number of years ago, and for the life of me, I wish I could find it again because it was a really useful one. It was back during the real pinnacle of pain science education, right? We've all been through that, where a lot of people are really offended by, you know, no, it's not here, your pain's not here, it's up here. And a lot of the mischaracterizations of the pain science movement. But anyway, it was a physical therapy journal. Do me a favor, put that's my practice there. Don't do that one. Do my other website, which is waltfritz.com. All right.
All right, I'll do that.
Yeah. So while I'm jabbering at you here, anyway, what they did was they took a population of patients with non-specific low back pain. And what they wanted to do was provide quality pain science education that, you know what, just because you're having pain doesn't mean you've got a blown out disc or a torn muscle or all these biomechanical factors that are so commonly passed around. So basically what they did in the study was they brought patients in, they did a pre-treatment interview where they basically got the patient's core beliefs and understanding. Thank you very much. That looks so much better. And then they did basically an hour of quality pain science education to see if they could shift a patient's belief systems. And you know what? They couldn't. No matter how hard they did, no matter how quality the evidence was, patients basically stuck onto the story that they came in your door with. So I looked at that study and it's like, okay, it's not that I don't want to introduce my patients to maybe different, not better, right? Because that's very subjective and opinion based, right? But different narratives, like, sure, I'll give them that, but is that how I want to spend time, knowing full well that there's a good chance that that person's never going to uncling from the trigger point belief or whatever it is they have? So I shifted over to say, okay, it could be this, this, or this, but right now, Diane, as I do this with my hand on that area of pain, are we doing something that feels useful? And if not, what might you do by giving me hand over hand help to say, okay, now that's more effective. I feel like you're connecting with my issue right now. I
Well,
ask a lot of my patients, I really do. But most of them find it pretty darn worthwhile.
so tell, I mean, you're all over the place now. I love online how you take pictures of your feet when you're traveling. You have great
Mhm.
shoes. And just let me tell us what you have up and coming and some of your favorite
Ah,
classes that you're teaching right
okay, so I'm right now, I'm in the Hartford, Connecticut area. I just drove here today from upstate New York. I teach this weekend. Next week, I'm in Olympia, Washington. The following week, I'm in London, England. We were in Athens, Maine last month for a great trip. So I teach primarily in the United States, but I get a lot of really cool international gigs. We're doing a bunch of classes in India this November and the Middle East next February. So it's lots of fun. My primary my primary audience is speech pathologists, but I get a lot of other people come into my classes. Some of it is because of wonderful people like you who invite me on and just sort of, kind of spread that awareness of who I am. And, I don't just teach the speech pathology specific. A lot of massage therapists come maybe because they just heard me talk on and they finally want to put an end to it. It's like, okay,
now.
what does he teach, right? And some of it's for, like you said, the guy that works with you, maybe he had a niche interest. Some of it is that, some of it's basic neck region work, anterior cervical work, tongue-based work. But a lot of it is for, I think, kind of this sort of counterculture approach to, let's treat the person and not the tissue. I like to think that's what maybe brings people to my classes.
I think that's great. I think if people can walk away with a couple techniques and then, anything that'll help expand their mind. And like I said, I can just tell you guys firsthand that since Andrew took Walt's class, there's been a huge shift in his practice and there's excitement and his clients, he's seeing more people and we have people calling to request some of the work that you taught them in class. So I can say firsthand that I've had an experience with Walt. So, hey,
Yeah.
Walt. You're doing a
Hey,
great job. You said he had an awesome time at your class too. So, uh,
thanks.
I mean, there's no.
The concept of techniques too, to me, is rather, I think it's kind of limiting in a way. Well, not limiting, but when I took my MFR training, it's like you could almost take an endless number of courses. And I don't want to badmouth people who have those tiered levels of training, because they're really desirable by a lot of us clinicians. We want to feel like we're getting the full, the gamut of it, to really understand the whole, not just the narrative that underpins it, but the techniques themselves. But I think one of the ways that I teach techniques is, it's almost like, here's a place to start, but can the patient guide you to almost a different technique that feels like, I may think that, oh no, I found your problem by sticking my finger in your pterygoid. And I feel like, based on all my training, I should be able to detect the problem and then figure out what to do. But if we really let our ego drop, there's a lot of times where they'll basically say, no, you're not quite on it, or you're nowhere near it. And they move your hand completely to a different spot. Now, if you're wearing the cloak of the healer, right, that intuitive, ego-driven model, that's really crushing to a lot of us. But if you're trying to open up a door of shared decision making, to say, it's almost like I say to them, here's where I'll start, Dan, in the area that you told me you feel the problem, but where do we need to go from there? Now, that's really confusing to people like me who learn, well, you don't start here, you always balance the pelvis first, or you do this first before you do that, or nothing else will stick or hold. But we know that that's not always the case. In fact, it's often not the case. Sometimes we can go and use as a starting point a place where a person experiences the issue. And to me, it's the perfect place to, number one, to validate another human being's lived experience. No, we need to start at your pelvis, can be very invalidating to a person who has a headache. And maybe they'll give me just enough rope to say, okay, you're an expert, I'm going to trust you for a bit, but boy, my head really hurts. I love to start at a place that the person feels valued. Like I'm actually listening to them and not using them as a, oh, here's another patient who have to balance their pelvis first, right? And a lot of clinicians that's really irritating, and I'm fine with that. I was irritated 30 years ago when I learned MFR, and people said counter arguments, to those sorts of things. But I guess with age comes, a little bit of acceptance that there's a lot we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the longer I'm here, I just am more perplexed.
Yeah. It was really interesting too, because I did a podcast last night for a group of myofunctional therapists. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of myofunctional work. Myofunctional therapists tend to be either speech pathologists or, believe it or not, dental hygienists. And they train in this approach of airway issues, that we need a clear airway. And a lot of it comes from improper tongue resting posture, from a tongue tie that needs to be, laser release, that sort of thing. But we were talking about some of the things that you and I take for granted, right? The forward head. Oh, the forward head is due to fill in the blank. How many different things have you ever heard of what the forward head is due to? And then that's the result of why you're having problems. And I heard one last night that I've never heard before. In their narrative, that if there's too much tongue tension, the head is forced forward, right? Totally different narrative that I've never heard before. And it's like, well, chalk that up to one more story that we all sort of like bounce back and forth in our echo chambers, right? Can a human being exist with forward head and not have problems? Abso-friggin-lutely, right? So to say that anybody with a forward head needs that corrected or they're going to have problems in the future, I think is a load of crap. We don't have crystal ball abilities, at least that the evidence has proven, right? There is so much out there in our shared worlds that if we stick our head out the rabbit hole, there's a lot of dissonance out there. So we tend to stay buried in the rabbit hole, in the echo chamber, in the silo, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's really time we brought our heads out of the hole and started seeing what other people are doing and listening to them.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's the first time I heard that. And like you said, interesting perspective. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm just so honored to have you here. I've got this talk with you once before, and I just adored our conversation, and I adored this one equally as much. And like you said, I'm living proof at my practice that taking your class has a really positive effect on a therapist and how they interact with clients and getting clients. And so I just want to thank you personally. I get to thank you personally for helping my practice grow. So
it's my pleasure.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't take anything that I've said as insulting, right? I learned so much in all the different manual therapy educations that I've taken. But it's okay to kind of not continually speak the group speak, right? It's okay to break free and realize, you know what? I learned something of great value from that individual, from that model, from those years. But don't be afraid to make things your own.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of evidence, because it's tough to really do a really good study on manual therapy. Well, that's not totally true. We can set up a study where, for instance, I get Google Scholar alerts on a daily basis for things myofascial, right? But what they're really showing is when somebody does work that is said to be myofascial work, it's helpful. But very, very little of it proves the mechanism of actions. And I think, if anything, I would, as a piece of not advice, because that sounds too like fatherly, but to start looking in assessing and really being critical of what people are telling us of mechanisms of action. Last year, I'm 65 now. Last year, I published my first research paper at age 64. And it was basically a paper that was questioning the narratives for the mechanism of actions that continue to be published in laryngeal manipulation research. And the whole paper applies completely to the more general field of massage and manual therapy. The mechanisms that were taught to us are not necessarily the true mechanisms, because they're almost too difficult to completely understand and unpack. So all I do is encourage people to say, continue to question authority, even if it gets you booted from your tribe.
Yes, thank you very much for joining me. And you see Walt's website there. Please jump on there and check it out.
Yeah.
Check out a
Oh, and
class.
by the way, I don't mean to be too silly, but you gave me the opportunity. I no longer teach the more general whole body type work in an in-person setting, but I do have online courses. I have a whole body class if you're looking for that. Kind of that approach of, mine is a myofascial release looking style approach, but it's very different when it comes to how we communicate with the patient, how we think of what's happening. And a lot of times our thoughts turn right back into how we end up treating. And even though I might be doing what looks like a MFR type crosshand release, it's just staged in such a different fashion. And I think that's the fun part of this work, and I encourage everybody to be unique, be an individual, and don't be afraid of the pressure from your mentors when they start pressing their thumb down on you, trying to hold you back. That's, by the way, a very personal story right there.
Thank you, Walt. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Diane.
Check him out. You gotta check him out. All right.
Appreciate your time. Bye, all.
Hang tight for a minute, Walt.